Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa Coletti, Managing Director of Aspiriant Family Office Practice. For those of you who are not familiar with our firm, Aspiriant is a national, independent, employee-owned wealth management and multifamily office firm serving a broad range of individuals and families. Please note that this session is being recorded. On your toolbar, you'll find available resources, including our exclusive family office article and overview materials. Also note that there's a Q&A box to submit any questions that you may have. We'll do our best to address them at the end of this session, but if we're short on time, we'll get back to you through email. If you're not seeing the resources in the Q&A box, just click on the More button on the bottom of your screen and it should take you there. I am delighted to share that we are also going to offer complimentary strategy sessions for those who would like to explore how the ideas that we discussed today might apply to your own circumstances. So with those housekeeping matters behind us, why don't we get started? Today, we're going to focus on our experience of working with ultra-high net worth families and how our integrated service offering and multidisciplinary approach helps move folks from a sense of, this is way too much for me to handle, to a feeling of, we can finally breathe and we know that our team has our back. In my career, I've observed that families arrive at this feeling of overwhelm in many different ways. Sometimes it's sudden because of a business sale, an IPO, or an unexpected inheritance. And other times it's gradual, where a longtime do-it-yourselfer realizes that the complexity of their financial world has really outgrown the structure that they've put in place for themselves. And sometimes it's a lifelong journey where somebody has been born into wealth and they recognize that the legacy assets that they've been given require a much more deliberate and professional framework. So with that context, I'd like to introduce you to two of my partners and fellow leaders in our exclusive family office practice. Both have been with Aspiriant for more than 20 years, which speaks not only to their experience, but also to the continuity we really value in our client relationships. Song Park leads our wealth management practice, and Carl Forrester leads our investment advisory team. Together, they bring decades of experience working closely with individuals and multi-generational families navigating significant financial complexity. I'm going to help guide the conversation today, and Song and Carl are going to share their real-world perspective from the front lines of doing this work with families. So before we dive in, I'd like to level set with a discussion of what does the term multifamily office actually mean? Carl and Song, for both of you, I'm noticing that the term family office gets used fairly broadly today. What does it mean to be a multifamily office? And how is that different from traditional wealth management?
Thanks, Lisa. Being very careful not to paint all advisors with one broad brush, but it's interesting to see how the lingo in our industry has changed over the last, say, 20 to 30 years. I think this really originates from some of the larger banks and wirehouses when stockbrokers became investment advisors. I happen to be one of them. And as the registered investment advisory industry has really expanded over the past decade or more, those same investment advisors became wealth managers. And now it seems those wealth managers are advertising family office services. But I think if you did a deep dive into those firms versus a firm like ours, you would see that there's quite a big difference.
Yeah, I think that evolution has definitely created some confusion for families who are trying to understand the differences and what they're actually getting with different types of practices.
Yeah, I think when it comes down to it, the difference is the level of responsibility the firm and the client service team is accepting in a multifamily office structure. Traditional wealth management often focuses on financial planning, sufficiency analysis, cash flow planning, and primarily on portfolios, asset allocation, manager selection, and of course, performance. I think a true family office, multifamily office is broader. It means serving as a family's central financial partner, integrating all of the above with estate planning coordination, tax strategy, governance, philanthropy, and risk management into one cohesive structure with one team seeing the full picture at the same time. Really, families shouldn't have to quarterback their own advisory team. That's our role.
Yeah, I really love that framing song. Family shouldn't have to manage the managers. So, Carl, I've heard you say that there are many firms that offer family office services, but very few are truly integrated. How do you explain that distinction for our audience?
It's really drawing a distinction between offering the menu of services that you see on the graphic here, with actually bringing them together in a really coordinated way. And in plain language, a lot of firms help with investments or estate planning or tax strategy, but often you see these services operate in silos. There's not a durable, dedicated team addressing these areas on an ongoing basis, and the client ends up acting as the hub, which the song mentioned shouldn't happen. In a truly integrated multifamily office, that firm, that team is taking on that responsibility. We're connecting the dots across investments, tax, estate, governance, philanthropy, ensuring that the decisions are consistent across the board. Durable team members are assigned in each discipline, and they're not just visiting guests who join, the conversation from time to time. We have a partner of ours who talks about a previous firm that he was at where he said he felt like he was parachuting into these client meetings, and it's just really not that effective. And so here our team members join every meeting to ensure that nothing gets missed and nothing's slipping through the cracks.
Yeah, and honestly, that's really one of the things that I love most about my role in leading Aspiriant's family office practice. I get to help ensure that all of the pieces you're seeing here on the screen, investments, tax, estate planning, governance, that they're all working together for the family. And that, as Carl said, nothing slips through the cracks. And when that coordination is done well, you can really feel the shift for families. It doesn't necessarily mean that the complexity disappears, but it does become way more organized, intentional, and much more manageable.
That's right, Lisa. It reminds me of a client that Carl and I served that had a team of very sophisticated advisors when they came to us for help. Multiple money managers, international CPA firm, and a top-tier estate planning attorney. The clients were serial entrepreneurs and have been really successful in creating wealth. Their former advisors in each of their silos did really great work. The only problem was that the client was left to lead the process and the translation between professionals and really didn't know where the blind spots were. So ultimately, the previous advisors did some good planning that should have been great planning. And if it was all coordinated, integrated, and executed properly, they literally left millions of dollars on the table.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful example of how that fragmentation can lead to some pretty bad consequences.
Yeah, and in this particular case, they used a considerable portion of their lifetime exemption to purchase an insurance policy and an ILET to cover the future potential estate tax. Like Song mentioned, really good planning, but 10 years later, the size of the estate ballooned more than three times. And so now the potential insurance proceeds can only cover a fraction of that estate tax liability, and they're left with very little flexibility to do additional planning.
Yeah, I think that really underscores how plans need to evolve and be flexible as circumstances change. So, with the clarification of what differentiates a multifamily office, behind us, let's talk about what actually prompts families to seek this level of service integration. Song, in your experience, what are the most common moments or trigger events that cause families to take a step back and say, this is way too much. I need to seek out some help?
Yeah, the most common trigger events are liquidity events, generational transitions, a major investment, or maybe even a planning misstep, and often simply just the accumulation of complexity over time. What worked when the family's balance sheet was simpler no longer works, and they realize they're managing a system that has outgrown its structure, and really anxiety can creep in.
Yeah, I think that gradual buildup of the complexity and anxiety is definitely something that we see fairly often. So, Carl, this one's for you. When a family is feeling overwhelmed, what are they usually reacting to? Is it investment complexity, operational burden that comes from, just the managing the day to day? Is it confusion over taxes, or is it simply fear of the unknown and the blind spots that they can't see?
It's D, all of the above. Seriously though, it usually is a combination, and in the investment complexity is usually the visual stressor, but underneath it's an operational burden, it's a fear of unknown blind spots, whether they be tax exposure, liquidity concerns, or even risks that no one's actively monitoring. The anxiety often comes from not knowing what they might not know and what they might be missing. The sense that there are, more important issues out there that are outside of their sightline.
Yeah, and one of the biggest issues we see is that families often underestimate governance risk. As wealth grows, decision making becomes more complex, and without clear roles and processes, misunderstandings can turn into real emotional strain or even long-term risks, which is really unfortunate. And the other piece is continuity. If the advisory team is built only around the founding generation, the next generation can feel disconnected and maybe unprepared. So we're very intentional about developing the next generation of advisors inside the firm and working directly with rising generations in the family, educating them, giving them a voice in the process, and creating continuity so that the framework endures well beyond just a single generation.
Yeah, I think that's so important. The continuity across the generations is such a key part of the overall equation. So now that we've set the table of what true multifamily services look like, and we have a general understanding of what prompts families to seek this level of support, I'd like to pivot to a client example to bring the experience of working with our a multifamily office team to life. So in one client situation, we're working with two siblings, and they were contemplating the sale of a family business for a sum that their parents, and grandparents could never have imagined. And intellectually, they knew that they would have more wealth than they could ever realistically spend after this sale. But emotionally, they were really struggling. Alongside the excitement of what the sale represented for them came a tremendous amount of stress and anxiety centered on a simple but profound question of what now? Life as they knew it was about to change dramatically. And while it can be exciting, something like that, it can also be very scary. So, Song, when you're working with clients, how do you help answer that question? What now?
I mean, this is great. This is really where the partnership and collaboration with the family becomes very exciting. It's very similar to creating a mosaic of their financial life story, but it's also very important to point out the timing of these conversations.
Yeah, it's the old saying that the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today.
Exactly, exactly. The key for these siblings is that they started this conversation before this business was sold. Obviously, it's not an absolute necessity, but it makes the opportunity set expand incredibly.
And while these siblings have been running the family business together for decades, they're shockingly very different people with very different needs.
Yeah, and Carl, we can provide some context around the siblings in this situation. The older sibling, children through college, they feel they've achieved their personal goals, really more focused on next gen and charity. And the younger sibling with really much younger family and more concerned about satisfying lifestyle and education planning. So in these situations, we begin with structured discovery, understanding their goals, values, entities, cash flow, and family dynamics. From there, we triage thoughtfully what's urgent, what's important but time sensitive, and what can be sequenced deliberately over time. Those early wins are often operational in nature, and operational clarity has the immediate emotional impact. When families can see the structure, the anxiety begins to subside, and they can exhale. So, I mean, it could mean a bunch of different things, but it could mean building a comprehensive balance sheet so they can view their entire financial picture in one place, really often, sometimes for the first time. Or it can mean stepping into a streamlined day-to-day financial operations, consolidated reporting, coordinating advisors, or taking over bill pay and cash flow management. These integrated steps build out the foundation and infrastructure for the family to make intentional decisions. I mean, these aren't glamorous tasks, but they create stability, and stability creates breathing room.
Yeah, and that breathing room is, I think, exactly what many families are looking for so that they can focus on the things that matter most to them in this life and not, have to struggle through the day-to-day financial matters. So that's really great. So now that you've taken me through what feels like, an incredible amount of work getting the structure set up, I'm realizing that I haven't heard the word investment portfolio or strategy yet. At what stage of the process are you ready to dive in and actually start discussing the investment strategy?
Yeah, I have to get in there before Carl. So before we design an investment portfolio, we have to step back and ask, what are we solving for? In a liquidity event, tax strategy, and estate planning are not afterthoughts. They're foundational design elements.
Yeah, it's interesting. We always have to go to the why. And, when we think about it, really there's only four ways that families and, our clients can spend their money. It's lifestyle, it's capital assets, so it's that second house or third house, it's a boat, it's a plane, hopefully it's not a restaurant. Their family and estate planning, or it's philanthropy and charity. So, those are the four. And then we say that the fifth one is taxes, which, unfortunately we can't avoid. But hopefully through our process, we can do a lot of things to sort of mitigate, that risk. These objectives really start to define the pools of capital. And then the investment strategy is built to support those pools with intention. So, we say that we don't build portfolios first and then retrofit the planning around it. We design the architecture first, and then the portfolio has to support it.
Yeah, I think that architecture first approach really helps reframe the conversation in a way that many folks aren't necessarily used to. So that's great. We start with the why.
Yeah, and we take our families through a wealth allocation process to begin assigning dollar amounts to those pools of assets to create context for their wealth and therefore clarity around the decision-making process.
And then once this clarity exists, then we start thinking about an investment framework that's anchored in purpose, required return, liquidity needs, legacy intent. And in almost all of our family office engagements, risk becomes a preference rather than a requirement. And importantly, that allows us to be very intentional about where we're taking that risk and why. So, we may have a more conservative approach with capital that's required for lifestyle or near-term objectives, while thoughtfully embracing longer-term risk in multi-generational or charitable pools that are designed to compound over decades. And in that way, the portfolio really becomes a tool that's aligned with these distinct objectives, protecting what must be protected and then prudently growing what's meant to endure. And, if we go back to the siblings, this meant that we built a very conservative portfolio for the younger sibling. Surprise, surprise, age doesn't always equal your fixed income allocation. And then we built several portfolios for the older sibling to match their multi-generational and philanthropic goals that were going to be a bit more aggressive.
So how does the integrated process that you're taking clients through help avoid, common pitfalls of them reacting to what they're hearing in the news, trends, cocktail party ideas that they hear that might not be right for them?
Yeah, we always like to joke to avoid the cocktail parties because the questions are almost always around the latest investment opportunities, whether it be private equity, hedge funds, private credit, IPOs, sophisticated tax strategies. Some of the latest being these tax alpha strategies from the AQRs, the Quantinos, the Parametrics of the world. And while these are all durable allocations within many of our clients' portfolios, and for very good reason. Usually the first question we get is, can you access it? When it should really be, should we even use it and why, and then where?
It doesn't stop with the investment only ideas. The acronym list flows in these conversations. GRATs, IDGITs, CRUTs, SLATs, Q-tips, and so on. And each can be powerful in the right context and risky in the wrong one, especially because many involve irrevocable decisions around transferring assets.
Yeah, so I guess the key here is it's not a one size fits all type of proposition, and we need to make sure that whatever investment strategy or any planning strategy that we're using is actually going to serve the family's broader plan. So with that as some background, now we've got the urgency under control, framework has been built, investment portfolio is in place. The day-to-day burden is feeling a little lighter. What do families generally start focusing on next?
The focus shifts to meaning, values, defining purpose, philanthropy, next generation readiness, and establishing governance structures that preserve harmony. The focus moves from managing wealth to stewarding it thoughtfully. And that's where we're working as much with the rising generation as with the founders. Building financial fluency, shared language, and durable decision-making structures across the family. And really, in many ways, it mirrors the hierarchy of needs. Just as individuals require food, shelter, and safety before focusing on higher pursuits, families require organization, coordination, risk management, and clear cash flow before they can focus on legacy and purpose.
Yeah, and then from the investment perspective, we can start to align the investment policy with these legacy goals by grounding it in the clear objectives, spending, giving, growth, transfer plans. We incorporate, liquidity planning for philanthropy or estate needs, and importantly, to establish decision rules that really reduce emotional reactions. And so the strategy can endure across multiple market cycles and perhaps even generations. Grammatically, we always talk about the I before E rules, but in this case, it's I squared before E. And so we like to say that integration and intentionality help reduce the likelihood of emotionally driven decisions, which can be the most costly. And that integration provides a disciplined filter that prevents FOMO. If you think about it, over the last 25 years, we've had three what we call 100-year events, these statistical anomalies that are only supposed to happen every 100 years. But we had the TMT or the internet bubble collapse and burst. We had the GFC, the Great Financial Crisis. And then most recently, we had COVID. And what we learned about our clients and really ourselves during this time is that fear is a greater motivator than greed. And, they both swing like a pendulum, just like the market does, but it seems to be weighted heavier to fear. And it can really cause investors to make the wrong decisions at the worst times. And this is also why it's important to avoid those FOMO decisions because the backside swing of that pendulum is oftentimes a lot more painful.
Yeah, I think those perspectives that we can provide to family office clients really come from seeing multiple cycles over time.
Yeah, I think for family office clients, it comes down to doing reasonable things over a reasonable period of time that align with their goals, their holistic goals, values, and objectives. They create the conditions for their wealth to support future generations in the way that they intend.
So that's great. So we're at the end of our prepared remarks. So I'm going to turn my attention now to the Q&A. We have about 4 or 5 minutes ahead of us. So we probably only have time for one question before we close up. But I think there's one that might be on everyone's mind. So we'll get started with that and then answer the others through email. And that is, if a family is looking to work with a multifamily office, what should they focus on to make sure they're choosing the right long-term partner? So that's a really great question. I'll start with that. I think this process can be incredibly overwhelming. You have to evaluate investment acumen, tax expertise, governance experience, and the list goes on. You saw all of the things on that visual we showed you. But ultimately, you're not just hiring a service provider, you're really choosing a long-term partner for your family. And, with that in mind, I'd encourage everyone to start with the question of whether or not there's alignment. Does the firm really understand families like yours? Do they understand the complexity that comes with that level of wealth? And can they show you that they can support your family over decades, not just through, one liquidity event or a planning cycle, but for many years to come? And then I think some other things to keep in mind, I'll just throw some more acronyms into the mix here. Credentials matter, CFA, CFP, CPA, JD, that just demonstrates the breadth of the expertise. And just as important as that expertise, I think is really the team's experience of working together and serving families with similar needs. So, those are some of my thoughts here. Carl, maybe you can expand on what it looks like to talk about experience working with families like yours. What does that look like in practice?
Sure. When we talk about that experience, what we're really talking about is pattern recognition. Have the advisors worked with families who've sold businesses, managed concentrated stock positions, navigated multi-generational dynamics, or, even handled increasing complexity as their wealth grows. When a firm has seen those situations before, they're not reacting to them. They're actually anticipating what's going to happen. And that can prevent some really costly missteps. Another piece there is succession. What happens when the lead advisor retires? And I remember one of my mentors, Bob Wagman, telling me, he still needed to be in the room with me because he had the gray hair. 20 years later, now I'm obviously the one with the gray hair. Interesting, somehow Song still looks the same as she did the day that I started with her. But when it comes down to it, is there a team structure in place? Is there a clear succession plan for the children and the grandchildren of the clients, so that they aren't starting over with someone new? That continuity is really critical.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. Song, isn't this also where structure and incentives come into play?
Exactly. Even the best technical team can be influenced by how they're structured and compensated. So families should definitely and absolutely ask how the firm is paid. Are they fee only? Are there commissions involved? Are there proprietary products being used? And transparency matters. I mean, incentives shape behavior, and so independence is another key consideration. If a firm is tied to selling certain products, it can create embedded conflicts. And independent, objective advisors should be able to evaluate opportunities without pressure to distribute something. And then there's ownership. Who actually owns the firm? Is it employee owned? Is it backed by private equity? Ownership structure often influences long-term stability, investment philosophy, and maybe even culture. So if you're looking for a relationship that spans generations, you really want to understand what drives the organization behind the scenes.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, we need to wrap up here. Well, one thing we haven't touched on, but I believe is absolutely essential, it's really the importance of having a strong personal connection with your team. Keep in mind that you're going to be sharing deeply personal information and partnering together for years to come. And that kind of relationship requires much more than technical expertise. It really requires trust and genuine rapport. Um, you want to make sure you feel comfortable with the team on a personal level, feel heard, respected, at ease asking questions. And when that foundation is in place, the partnership becomes not just effective, but really meaningful as well.
Yeah, Lisa, it's one of the greatest compliments I and really our team ever received was when a client said to us, you really know us better than we know ourselves. It's like you're part of our family. And it really reinforces that relationship aspect that you mentioned.
Yeah, I love that, Carl. I love hearing that story. It really speaks to the depth of the partnership we strive for with families, and it's so rewarding for all parties involved. So, to wrap things up, what we've discussed today is the journey from fragmentation to overwhelm and overwhelm to clarity and confidence. As Song mentioned, in many ways, the journey mirrors a hierarchy of needs. We start with focusing on foundational elements because when the foundation is secure, families can finally exhale. So that's it for today. We really enjoyed being with all of you. Um, and from the position of stability, that's where the conversation naturally moves upward towards governance, philanthropy, and long-term stewardship, which we're going to explore more deeply in part 2 of our series in the coming months. And that's ultimately where a multifamily office adds the most value, not just organizing the financial pieces, but providing an enduring cross-generational team that helps families learn, adapt, and stay aligned over time. And if today's discussion resonates, we invite you to schedule a complimentary strategy session to continue the conversation. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We enjoyed our time together, and we hope to see you at the second session.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye now.